At the family dinner, my daughter-in-law said, "This shrew doesn't understand anything. She just signs and pays." When I confronted her, she said, "You're going to live on the street with the dogs." The next day, all her cards were declined. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I can still feel the weight of silence that fell over the dining room table. My son David looked down at his plate, suddenly fascinated by his half-eaten steak. My grandchildren, Emma and Tyler, froze with their forks midair. Even my sister Martha, who had joined us for our monthly family dinner, sat stunned, her eyes darting between me and Cleo. Cleo just sat there, chin raised, a triumphant gleam in her eyes as if she'd finally said out loud what everyone was thinking, but they weren't thinking it. Nobody was. "Excuse me?" I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, don't act surprised, Clarice," Cleo continued, swirling her wine. "Everyone knows you're just David's checkbook. You sign whatever we put in front of you and pay whatever bills we send your way." David finally looked up. "Cleo, that's enough," he mumbled, but there was no conviction in his voice. In 35 years, my son had never stood up to anyone. Not to the schoolyard bullies, not to his demanding bosses, and certainly not to his wife of 15 years. "What?" "It's true," Cleo persisted. "She doesn't understand our lifestyle, our needs. She just throws money at everything because that's all she knows how to do." I looked around the table. This beautiful mahogany table I had purchased for them as a housewarming gift when they moved into the home I had helped them buy. The crystal glasses that had been my mother's. The silver candlesticks I'd given them for their 10th anniversary. Everything in this house had my fingerprints on it, my hard-earned money invested in it. "I think you've forgotten something important, Cleo," I said, setting down my napkin. "This house you're so comfortable insulting me in? I paid for it." For a brief moment, Cleo's confidence faltered. Then her eyes narrowed. "And you never let us forget it, do you? That's exactly what I mean. You think your money gives you the right to control us." "Mom," David interjected weakly. "She doesn't mean it like that." But I was done pretending. At 64, I had spent too many years biting my tongue, making excuses for my son's weakness and his wife's cruelty. I've never controlled anything.
"David, I've only helped when you asked, and you've asked a lot." I stood up slowly. "I think I should go."
"Grandma, don't leave," Emma pleaded, her 12-year-old face clouded with confusion and distress. "It's okay, sweetheart. We'll talk soon," I promised, though I wasn't sure if Cleo would allow it. As I gathered my purse and cardigan, Cleo followed me to the door. I thought perhaps she might apologize, might recognize how deeply she had wounded me. Instead, she leaned in close, her voice low, so only I could hear. "If you ever try to turn my children against me or make David choose between us, you'll be living on the streets with the dogs. Remember who he'll always choose." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say to such naked hostility. I simply walked out to my car, my legs somehow carrying me despite the trembling in my knees. Later that night, alone in my own house, the one I'd worked 30 years to pay off after Harold died, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea gone cold. The check for David and Cleo's country club membership renewal lay on the counter where I'd left it that morning, ready to mail. Next to it was the stack of credit card statements I routinely paid for them. Neiman Marcus, Saks, wine clubs, golf equipment. For 15 years, I had supported their lifestyle because I wanted David to be happy. I wanted my grandchildren to have opportunities. I didn't want them to struggle the way I had after becoming a widow at 32. But tonight, something inside me had finally broken. Or perhaps it had finally healed. I picked up the country club check and tore it in half. Then I called my bank. "I need to cancel some additional cards on my accounts," I told the customer service representative. "And I need to stop all automatic payments to these accounts." By morning, it was done. My phone rang at 9:17 a.m. Cleo's name flashed on the screen. "What the hell did you do?" she demanded when I answered. "My cards were just declined at Nordstrom. I'm standing here with 6 bags and no way to pay." "I just sign and pay, remember?" I replied calmly. "But I've decided to stop doing that now." There was a moment of shocked silence before Cleo unleashed a torrent of threats and insults. I listened until she ran out of breath. "You've made your feelings about me very clear, Cleo," I said finally. "Now I'm making my feelings about you equally clear. Goodbye." I hung up and blocked her number. Then I blocked David's too, at least temporarily. I needed time to think, to plan, to decide what came next. For the first time in decades, I felt something unexpected. Freedom. The weight of obligation had lifted, replaced by a strange lightness. I wasn't just a checkbook. I was Clarice Wilson. And it was time I remembered who that woman was. The morning after I cut off Cleo's financial lifeline, I woke up feeling both lighter and heavier. Lighter because I'd finally stood up for myself. Heavier because I knew what would come next. The fallout wouldn't just be angry phone calls, it would be emotional warfare. As I made my morning coffee, memories flooded back. Memories of how I got here, of all the steps that led to yesterday's breaking point. Harold died suddenly when I was 32, leaving me with a 7-year-old son and a mountain of unexpected debt. My husband had been a dreamer, always chasing the next big investment opportunity, but terrible at managing what we actually had. The life insurance barely covered the funeral and past due mortgage payments. I still remember sitting at this same kitchen table, sorting through bills by candlelight because the electricity had been shut off. David had fallen asleep on the couch, clutching his father's sweater. That night, I made myself a promise. My son would never know the kind of financial insecurity that was now keeping me awake at night. The next morning, I pawned my engagement ring and used the money to take a real estate course. 6 months later, I sold my first house. Within 5 years, I was one of the top-selling agents in Sacramento. By the time David went to college, I owned my own brokerage. I gave David everything: private school, summer camps, a new car when he turned 16, full tuition at UCLA. Perhaps that was my first mistake. David never had to work for anything, never developed the resilience that comes from overcoming struggles. When he brought Cleo home during his senior year, I was initially charmed. She was beautiful, articulate, and seemed genuinely interested in my life story. She asked questions about my business, complimented my home, and talked about her ambitions to work in interior design. "She's the one, Mom," David had told me, his eyes shining with a confidence I rarely saw in him. "She makes me feel like I can do anything." They married a year after graduation. I gave them a generous down payment for their first condo as a wedding gift. Cleo hugged me tightly at the reception. "You're the mother I never had," she whispered. "I'll make sure David is always good to you." For the first 2 years, things were wonderful. Cleo started a small interior design business, and I referred my real estate clients to her. David found a job in marketing, though he seemed to change positions frequently, always because of toxic workplace environments or limited growth opportunities. Then Cleo became pregnant with Emma. She closed her design business, saying she wanted to focus on motherhood. That's when the financial requests began, first small ones, then larger ones. "It's just until David's next promotion," Cleo would say. Or, "We want to give Emma the same advantages David had growing up." I never refused. How could I? This was my family, my legacy. Besides, I had more than enough money. What else was I saving it for if not for them? When Tyler was born 3 years later, they needed a bigger house in a better school district. I provided the down payment and co-signed the mortgage. "You're an angel, Clarice," Cleo said the day they moved in. but something in her tone had changed. There was an edge to it, a subtle entitlement that hadn't been there before. Gradually, the dynamic shifted. My invitations to dinner became less frequent. When I did visit, Cleo would point out things they needed to upgrade. The visits became transactions, my presence tolerated in exchange for my financial support. David never noticed the change. Or if he did, he never acknowledged it. He had become increasingly passive, deferring to Cleo on every decision from the children's education to which family events they would attend. The Christmas when Emma was 7 crystallized everything. I had arrived with carefully chosen gifts, a telescope for Emma, who was showing interest in science, and a set of illustrated adventure books for Tyler. Cleo barely glanced at them. "We're trying to minimize the children's exposure to material possessions," she said, even as Emma and Tyler played with the mountain of expensive toys already filling their playroom. Later that evening, however, Cleo showed me photos of a luxury ski condo in Tahoe she wanted to invest in. The asking price was nearly $500,000. It would be a perfect gathering place for family holidays, she explained, and a solid investment for your grandchildren's future. I wrote the check 2 days later. We spent exactly one Christmas there before Cleo decided the mountains were too isolating and sold the property. I never saw a penny from the sale. That should have been my wake-up call. Instead, I simply absorbed the loss and continued enabling their lifestyle. Country club memberships, private school tuition, luxury cars. I covered it all while Cleo's treatment of me grew increasingly dismissive. David called me less and less. My access to my grandchildren became more restricted, always with vague excuses about schedule conflicts or family time. Then came last month's request. Cleo wanted to renovate their kitchen and master bath. The estimate was over $200,000 for imported Italian marble and custom cabinetry. "It's an investment in the home's value," she insisted when I hesitated for the first time. I agreed, but asked to be involved in the planning since real estate was my expertise. Cleo's smile hardened. "We wouldn't want to burden you with the details," she said. "Just the financing." That was the first crack in my facade of acquiescence. The comments at last night's dinner, the shrew remark, and the threat about living with dogs. Those were just the final blows to a relationship that had been fracturing for years. As I poured a second cup of coffee, my phone lit up with text. Messages from David. "Mom, what's going on? Cleo is upset. Can you please call me back? We need to talk. Mom, the mortgage payment was due yesterday. Did you forget?" I set the phone down without responding. For 15 years, I had been trying to buy David's independence. Instead, I had purchased his subservience to Cleo and my own emotional exile from the family I helped build. No more. It was time for all of us to learn a difficult but necessary lesson about the true cost of financial dependence. By noon, my phone had logged 37 missed calls, 23 from Cleo, 14 from David. I silenced it and placed it face down on the kitchen counter. For the first time in years, I decided my peace was more important than their demands. When the doorbell rang at 2 o'clock, I knew exactly who it was. I considered not answering, but I wasn't a coward. I'd made my decision. Now I needed to stand by it. David stood on my porch, his shoulders hunched, his face drawn with worry. He looked so much like Harold in that moment. The same furrowed brow, the same nervous habit of running his hand through his hair. "Mom?" he said as soon as I opened the door. "What's happening?" "Cleo is having a meltdown. The credit cards aren't working, the mortgage payment bounced, and she said you were incredibly cruel to her." I stepped back to let him in but didn't immediately respond. In my living room, David paced back and forth like a trapped animal. "Is this about what she said at dinner? You know how Cleo gets when she's had a few glasses of wine." She didn't mean it. She meant every word, David, I replied, keeping my voice steady. And it wasn't just what she said at dinner. It's been building for years. He stopped pacing and stared at me. What are you talking about? When was the last time you paid your own mortgage, David? Or your car payment? Or your children's tuition? He blinked rapidly, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. You said you wanted to help. You said you had more than enough. I did want to help. But there's a difference between helping and enabling. I've been enabling you and Cleo to live beyond your means while treating me like an ATM machine. That's not fair, he protested, but his eyes couldn't meet mine. We appreciate everything you do. Do you? When Cleo called me a shrew at dinner, you said nothing. When she threatened that I'd be living on the streets with dogs, you said nothing. Is that appreciation, David? He sank onto my sofa, deflated. What do you want me to do, Mom? Cleo, you know how she gets. If I contradict her, she makes life unbearable for days. My heart ached for my son, but I also felt a surge of disappointment. The little boy I had raised to be strong and independent had become a man afraid of his own wife's moods. What I want is for you to stand on your own 2 feet, I said. I want you to take responsibility for your life and your choices. I want you to remember that I'm your mother, not your banker. So you're just cutting us off? Just like that? A note of panic entered his voice. The kids have tuition due next month. The property taxes. You and Cleo earn nearly $200,000 a year between you, I interrupted. That's more than enough to live comfortably if you adjust your spending. You don't need 3 luxury cars. The children don't need designer clothes. You don't need a country club membership. His face hardened. So this is a punishment. No, David. This is a boundary. I will always be your mother, and I will always love you and my grandchildren. But I will no longer finance a lifestyle that comes with disrespect and ingratitude. He stood up abruptly. Cleo was right about you. You're using money to control us. The accusation stung, but I didn't flinch. If that's what you believe, then I've failed as a mother in more ways than I realized. David stormed out without another word. Through the window, I watched him pull away in the BMW I had purchased for his 40th birthday. My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice, but I remained resolute. This pain was necessary, for all of us. 3 days passed with no contact. On the 4th day, an email arrived from Cleo. The subject line read simply, Terms. Clarice, it began, no dear or any other pleasantry. Your behavior has been deeply hurtful to our family. However, we are willing to move forward under the following conditions. All financial support will be reinstated immediately, including credit cards, mortgage payments, and the Children's Education Fund. You will sign a formal agreement guaranteeing these payments will continue regardless of personal disagreements. You will apologize to me for your hostile actions. In return, you will be allowed to see your grandchildren once a month under our supervision. Please respond promptly. The children are asking about you, and we don't want to tell them their grandmother has abandoned them. Regards, Cleo. I read the email 3 times, each reading stoking my indignation further. The audacity of her terms, the thinly veiled threat. Regarding my grandchildren, it was breathtaking in its entitlement. I drafted a dozen responses in my head, each more cutting than the last. But ultimately, I simply pressed delete. Some messages didn't deserve a response. That evening, my doorbell rang again. When I opened it, my heart lurched. Emma and Tyler stood on my porch, backpacks over their shoulders, their faces solemn. Grandma, Emma said, her voice small but determined. Can we come in? Dad dropped us off. He said to tell you he'll be back in 2 hours. I ushered them inside, my mind racing. Was this David's way of reaching out? Or was he using my grandchildren, As emotional leverage? We missed you, Tyler said, wrapping his arms around my waist. At 8 years old, he was still unabashedly affectionate. I missed you too, sweetheart, I replied, fighting back tears. Emma, perceptive as always, fixed me with a serious gaze. Mom said you're not coming to visit anymore because you're mad at her. It's complicated, Emma, I answered carefully. Sometimes adults disagree about important things. Is it about money? She asked. Mom told Dad you're being selfish with your money. The bluntness of children, both devastating and clarifying. It's not just about money, I explained. It's about respect and independence. We spent the next hour making cookies and catching up on their school activities. I carefully avoided asking about Cleo or the home situation, not wanting to put them in the middle. But as they were getting ready to leave, Emma handed me a folded piece of paper. Dad said to give you this, she whispered. After they left, I unfolded the note with trembling hands. Mom, it read in David's familiar scrawl. Cleo doesn't know I brought the kids to see you. Things are difficult at home right now. I'm trying to understand your position, but please don't punish the children for our mistakes. They need their grandmother. David. I pressed the note to my chest, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. David had defied Cleo to bring my grandchildren to me. It was a small act of courage, but perhaps it was the beginning of something larger. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. The path forward was still unclear, but for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope that it wouldn't be a path I walked alone. 2 weeks passed with no word from David after his clandestine drop-off of the children. I tried not to let the silence consume me, but my house felt emptier than ever. The quiet that had once been comforting now seemed to echo with absence. One particularly lonely evening, I found myself staring at an old photo album. Pictures of David as a little boy, gap-toothed and carefree, his high school graduation, his wedding day, with Cleo radiant in white, both of them looking at me with genuine affection. When had things changed? When had money become the foundation of our relationship instead of love? The doorbell interrupted my melancholy. To my surprise, Martha stood on my porch, holding a casserole dish and wearing a determined expression. You haven't returned my calls, she said, pushing past me into the house. I figured you'd be sitting here wallowing, so I brought lasagna. Despite everything, I laughed. My sister had always been the direct one. I wasn't wallowing, I protested weakly. Just reflecting. Same thing. Martha headed straight for my kitchen and began setting the table as if she owned the place. I told her everything. Cleo's insults, David's weakness, the financial manipulation, and my decision to cut them off. Martha nodded approvingly. It's about damn time. I've watched that woman treat you like a piggy bank for years. But what if I've lost them for good? I asked, voicing my deepest fear. What if David never brings the children back? Martha reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Then you build a life that's so full they can't help but want to be part of it. Remember who you were before you became just David's mother and Emma and Tyler's grandmother. Her words struck a chord. Who was I now? For so long, I'd defined myself by my role in their lives. Without that, what remained? The next morning, I woke with a strange energy coursing through me. I made a list, not of bills to pay or family obligations, but of things I used to love doing before life got in the way. Gardening, book clubs, theater, travel. I started small. That afternoon, I drove to the local nursery and bought flats of marigolds, zinnias, and tomato seedlings. My backyard had been neglected for years. The flower beds choked with weeds, the vegetable garden I once loved reduced to a patch of stubborn crabgrass. As I dug my hands into the soil, pulling weeds and preparing the earth for new life, I felt something inside me begin to heal. The work was hard, my muscles protesting after years of disuse, but the physical exertion was cathartic. That's quite a project you've taken on. I looked up, squinting against the sun, to see an elderly woman peering over the fence that separated our yards. I vaguely recognized her as the woman who had moved in next door about a year ago, though we'd never spoken beyond a casual wave. "I'm reclaiming old passions," I replied, wiping sweat from my brow. She smiled, deep lines crinkling around kind eyes. "I'm Eleanor. I've been admiring your property from afar, but never see you outside much." "Clarice," I offered. And no, I haven't. Been much of a gardener lately. Life got in the way. "Life has a habit of doing that," she agreed. "Would you like some help? I have a terrible back these days, but I'm quite good at directing other people's labor." I found myself laughing again, the second time in 2 days after weeks of solitude and silence. I'd like that very much. Eleanor turned out to be a retired botany professor with an encyclopedic knowledge of plants and a wickedly dry sense of humor. Under her guidance, my garden began to take shape. During our breaks, she told me about her late partner of 40 years, about traveling the world studying rare flora, about rebuilding her life after grief. "The hardest part wasn't losing Sandra," she confided one afternoon as we sat on my patio, drinking iced tea. "It was figuring out who I was without her. We'd been together so long I'd forgotten where she ended and I began." I nodded, understanding perfectly. That's how I feel about being a mother. I've spent so many years defining myself by what I could give to my son that I forgot who I was beyond that. Eleanor regarded me thoughtfully. "And who are you discovering? Yourself to be, now that you're looking?" The question lingered with me long after she'd gone home. Who was I beyond the roles I'd played? It was both terrifying and exhilarating to realize I didn't quite know yet. In the weeks that followed, I began to find out. I joined a book club at the local library. I took a watercolor class at the community center. I had lunch with old colleagues from my real estate days, some of whom I hadn't seen in years. Slowly, my days filled with purpose that had nothing to do with supporting David and Cleo. My calendar, once dominated by their events and financial obligations, now overflowed with my own activities. And then, on a rainy Tuesday, exactly 5 weeks after I'd cut off financial support, my phone rang with David's number. "Mom," he said when I answered, his voice strained. "We need to talk." We arranged to meet at a coffee shop halfway between our homes, neutral territory. When I arrived, David was already there, hunched over a mug, looking exhausted. The expensive watch Cleo had insisted he needed was conspicuously absent from his wrist. "You look well," he said as I sat down, surprise evident in his voice. "I am well," I replied. "Better than I've been in a long time, actually." He nodded, eyes downcast. "That's good. I'm glad." I waited, sensing he had more to say. The old me would have rushed to fill the silence, to make things easier for him. The new me was learning patience. "Things have been hard," he finally admitted. "Without your help, we've had to make a lot of changes. Cleo's not taking it well." "I can imagine," I said neutrally. "We had to pull the kids out of private school," he continued. "Cleo sold her jewelry. I took out a loan to cover the mortgage. It's been eye-opening." I took a sip of my coffee, giving him space to continue. "Cleo wants me to convince you to reconsider," he said, finally meeting my gaze. "She drafted another email with demands, but I told her no. I told her I wouldn't pressure you anymore." My heart swelled with unexpected pride. That must have been difficult. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. It was terrifying, actually, but also liberating. He paused. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said about enabling. You were right. I've been letting Cleo dictate our lifestyle without taking responsibility for it. I've been hiding behind your financial support instead of standing on my own." "And now?" I prompted gently, Now I'm trying to change that. I've been looking for a better paying job. I'm learning to say no to Cleo's more extravagant demands. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his childhood that it made my chest ache. It's not easy. She's threatened to leave me twice already. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I didn't want my son to suffer. Don't. B, he replied with surprising firmness. This needed to happen. We needed to face reality. He reached across the table and took my hand. Thank you, Mom, for having the courage to do what I couldn't. As I drove home, tears blurred my vision. Not tears of sadness, but of cautious, oh, David was finding his strength just as I was finding mine. The road ahead would be neither straight nor smooth, but for the first time in years, it felt like we were both traveling in the right direction. Summer transitioned into fall, and with the changing leaves came a gradual shift in my relationship with David and the children. Our coffee shop meeting had opened a door, and though Cleo remained conspicuously absent from our reconnection, David brought Emma and Tyler to visit me every other weekend. I cherished these visits, which felt more genuine than our interactions had been in years. Without the veil of financial obligation hanging between us, David seemed more relaxed, more present. The children, though initially confused by the family tension, adapted with the remarkable resilience of youth. Mom wants to know if you're coming to my piano recital, Emma asked one Saturday as we baked cookies together, her fingers sticky with dough. I paused, surprised by the indirect olive branch. Did she say that specifically? Emma nodded, focused on shaping her cookies into perfect circles. She said to tell you that you're welcome to come if you want. Not exactly a warm invitation, but it was something. I'd love to come, I told her, and the smile that lit up her face was worth whatever awkwardness awaited me. The recital was held at the community center where Emma now took lessons, a downgrade from the prestigious music academy she'd previously attended, but she seemed no less enthusiastic about her performance. I arrived early and chose a seat near the back, unsure of my welcome. David spotted me immediately and came over, relief evident in his expression. Thanks for coming, Mom. It means a lot to Emma. I wouldn't miss it, I assured him. Where's Cleo? Saving seats up front, he replied, glancing over his shoulder. She knows you're here. The recital passed pleasantly enough, with Emma performing, a beautiful rendition of Debussy that brought tears to my eyes. Afterward, when the children were enjoying cookies and punch, Cleo approached me directly for the first time since our falling out. Clarice, she said, her tone carefully neutral. Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me, I replied, equally measured. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us, filled with unspoken grievances and tentative truce. The children miss you, she finally said, as if offering a precious concession. I've missed them too. Cleo smoothed her skirt, a simple cotton garment that had replaced her usual designer attire. Things have been challenging these past few months. I waited, curious to see where this was going. David and I have been discussing our situation, she continued. We think we've found a solution that would benefit everyone. Something in her tone set off warning bells. Oh? We're considering downsizing, she explained. The house is really too big for us now, especially with the current mortgage. We thought perhaps you might consider moving in with us. You could sell your house, and we could find a place that would accommodate all of us comfortably. I stared at her, momentarily speechless. After everything that had happened, this was her proposal? That I should sell my home and move in with them? It would be good for the children to have you around more, she added, clearly interpreting my silence as consideration. And, of course, it would help us financially during this transition period. Ah, there it was. The real motivation. That's quite a suggestion, I said carefully. Have you and David discussed the details? We have some thoughts, she replied, a hint of her old confidence returning. Your house should sell for at least $600,000 in this market. That would easily clear our debts and give us a fresh start in a more modest home. My house, my financial security, my independence, all to bail them out yet again, before I could formulate a response. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced down to see it was from Emma. "Grandma, are you really going to live with us? Mom said you might." My chest tightened. They had already discussed this with the children, using their excitement as another form of leverage. "I should go congratulate Emma on her performance," I said to Cleo, needing a moment to collect my thoughts. As I made my way through the crowd, I spotted David by the refreshment table. The look he gave me, hopeful yet ashamed, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just Cleo's idea. He was fully on board. That evening, I sat in my garden, watching fireflies dance among the flowers Eleanor and I had planted. The garden had become my sanctuary, a physical manifestation of my personal growth and healing. The thought of leaving it created a hollow feeling in my chest. "You seem troubled," Eleanor observed, joining me with 2 glasses of wine. Our evening conversations had become a cherished routine. I told her about Cleo's proposal, about the obvious financial motivation behind it, about the way they'd already enlisted the children's enthusiasm. "And what do you want?" Eleanor asked when I'd finished. "I want to be part of my grandchildren's lives," I answered honestly. "I want to see David continue to grow into the strong man I know he can be." "But?" she prompted. "But not at the cost of my own life," I admitted. "Not by enabling the same patterns we've been trying to break." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "Then you already have your answer." The next day, I invited David to my house, alone. He arrived looking both hopeful and nervous, like a teenager asking for the car keys. "Mom, before you say anything, I want you to know this was my idea too. No financial expectations. Just family being family." Tears pricked at my eyes. This was what I had wanted all along, not to be needed for my money, but to be wanted for myself. "I'd like that very much," I said. The following Sunday, I arrived at their apartment with a homemade lasagna and a potted herb garden for their small balcony. The apartment was modest but warm, filled with family photos and the children's artwork. Cleo greeted me with a genuine hug, our first in over a year. "Welcome," she said, and it felt like she meant it. Dinner was simple but delicious. We talked and laughed, sharing stories and plans for the future. No one mentioned money or status or what anyone was buying or paying for. We were simply present with each other, appreciating the moment for what it was. Later, as we enjoyed dessert, on their small balcony, I watched Emma teaching Tyler how to care for the herbs I'd brought. David and Cleo stood nearby, his arm around her waist, both of them looking more content than I'd seen them in years. In that moment, I realized that the garden I'd been tending most carefully wasn't the one in my backyard. It was this family, these relationships. I had pulled the weeds of enablement and dependency, tilled the soil with honest conversations, and planted seeds of respect and boundaries. Now, finally, something beautiful was beginning to grow. Eleanor had asked me months ago who I was discovering myself to be. Looking at my family now, healthier, more authentic, truly connecting, I knew the answer. I was Clarice Wilson, mother, grandmother, friend, gardener, creator of boundaries, and nurturer of true growth. And that was more than enough. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.